hello everyone, and welcome to the workshop on putting people first on the high streets. Just to check that you are in the right workshop. This is all about improving walking and cycling, boosting local businesses. So well done for choosing the correct workshop. This will be the best one of the webinar. So we've got a couple of speakers who I'm really excited about. We've got some real experts here on the call. So we have Heanry Cheung, am I saying that right, Heanry? I should have checked with you beforehand. Okay, Heanry Cheung, who is Head of Engineering for Richmond and Wandsworth councils in London. And he's going to be talking about the highly successful closure of Northcote Road, a high street in Wandsworth. And I've seen the slides and they gave me goosebumps, so I'm looking forward to that. And then we have Matteo Jarre of Decisio. And Matteo is an energy engineer and environmental governance expert, and he mostly researches sustainable mobility and bikeonomics in Italy. We like the sound of bikeonomics, Matteo. And then so Matteo will be presenting, and then not presenting, but here on the call to help answer questions, we have Kees van Ommeren, who is a founder of Decisio and a partner there, and he has 25 years of experience in transport economics. I also like the idea of transport economics, which wasn't a term I'd come across before I met Kees. And he does investment evaluations with a specialism in bikeonomics and also walkonomics, another new term for me today. So I'm really thrilled to have these guys speak to us, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions afterwards. Also, if you're on the Zoom call, I think you can do the poll, which is should be visible. And just briefly to introduce myself, I'm the moderator for this workshop. My name's Clare Rogers. I'm Healthy Streets campaigner for London Cycling Campaign, and I'm mainly focusing on central London, so Westminster and Kensington and Chelsea. And so in the over the last year, it's just been fascinating to see the response to COVID in the West End in particular, especially in Soho, as probably most people know, there's been a whole raft of streets timed closures, or openings, I should say, really, to help the hospitality industry get back on its feet with amazing successes. And more widely in Westminster, there's been parking converted into seating for alfresco dining. And all the evidence feedback is that this has saved businesses and it's saved jobs. So it'd just be really interesting to see, and I hope we can cover this a little bit in the workshop. You know, this has been an unprecedented experiment in London, across the UK, but what will it lead to when the crisis is over? How can we make sure that we don't go back to the status quo? So I'm hoping that's something that will come up. But for now, I will stop whittering and I'll hand over to Heanry. So I'm going to try and share my screen for Heanry's presentation. Everyone see that okay?
So good afternoon. My name is Heanry Cheung. I'm from Richmond and Wandsworth Council. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Northcote Road pedestrianisation. So start with the background, which is the next slide. So on the left, it shows Northcote Road. It's a B road. It's approximately half a mile long, just off the A3. This is also a bus route, and it's at the heart of the Northcote ward, surrounded by residential streets. There's an annual festive closure, summer fair, which has a budget of £50,000, and it ties in with the Wimbledon finals, attracting crowds of typically 15,000 a year. So in response to the pandemic, the council developed a transport action plan to take advantage of the various funding sources that were available to promote town centres, walking and cycling. The leaders group and a cabinet member were very keen to support the community and local businesses because of the impacts that COVID had had. So they set us a challenge of pedestrianising 3 high streets and in a borough to really support the local businesses and the community. So on the right hand side, this is the typical layout and of the festive closure, the annual festive closure, whereby there's completely no through access along the length of Northcote Road, and there is a vehicle parked on each of the junctions to safeguard from vehicle-borne attacks. And so that's the typical layout, traffic management layout that we have. So a little bit about the scheme, which is the next slide. So on the left-hand side, we make changes to the traffic management layout because we're conscious that there is lots of vehicular movements, and if this is going to be a regular feature And every weekend throughout the summer period, we want to make sure the least amount of disruptions to local residents in the area. So what we've done is we allow free traffic across the routes between Bolingbroke Walk, the Bolingbroke Grove and Webbs Road. So you can actually have access across the town centre itself, the main high street of Northcote Road. But whilst trying to keep traffic down, we had row ahead closed signs to deter, I guess, free traffic from using the area. So on the right-hand side, we use a series of water barriers and to protect the main road itself from vehicles entering, but allowing the through movements that talked about. So in terms of the scheme, we had a lot of discussions with the junction bid. So it has the benefit of a local bid. And we also consulted with Northcote Business Network to get their prior approval. But what we didn't do was actually engage with each of the individual businesses and the residents before taking action. We had to get TfL on board with the road closure itself because of the potential traffic impact, and because it's also a bus route, we needed to organise a diversion of the buses. We also had lots of discussions with emergency services in terms of how access was to be managed, and there was some concerns from some emergency services regarding the proposed closure, given that we are in a pandemic, and what their view was, this potentially is a festive closure, which it isn't. It is more a case of the council wishing to close the roads to create more space for social distancing and to support businesses, in particular the hospitalities. And so we did a temporary road closure order. We've sent out 10,000 letters to the residents and businesses of the ward, advising them and what the council proposed to do. You know, the first weekend shut on the 11th of July, and on the letter it talks about how we're going to carry this forward throughout the summer months, every weekend, and encouraging businesses and residents to show their support and for the local community. And so next slide, please. So behind the scene, I mean, it looks very nice. And I mean, this is actually a picture from the winter months. So this was taken in October, where people have got all their coats on. But in terms of getting the scheme delivered, you know, it starts at 5 a.m. on a Saturday morning. We've got the tow truck, we've got wardens and issuing tickets for any cars they will park there overnight. We've got litter pickers making sure all the streets are cleaned, and we've got operatives setting out the barriers. You know, some 200 water fill barriers, and then fill them up with water, put diversion signs out, and to have all the street ready, and about 7 or 8 o'clock onwards. And, also, there was lots of close liaison with stewards, local businesses in terms of how the scheme was to run. You know, every week we learned something new in terms of what the local feedback was from residents, from businesses, what their concerns were. And after each weekend, initially we had a meeting with the police to talk about the night itself and the day and the night, because there's a completely different clientele and throughout the day. In the morning, you've got people coming to pick up the paper, going to the local bakery, and then late in the evening, you know, you've got the drinkers and who likes to have a pint. But throughout the day, you know, there's lots of children enjoying, and the street itself, you can see young children cycling, and a lot of access was maintained for cyclists as well. We didn't prohibit cycling, but a lot of cyclists actually chose to dismount from their bike and just to push it through along the street and then enjoy the experience. And I mean, a very important point as well is the colleagues in economic development. They really pushed the businesses hard, and it was making sure that they take responsibility, because obviously there's a need for social distancing and not to place profit before safety. So that was a very good that the businesses were all on board, because they know what was at risk. And you know, the council was set out measures to specifically assist them. In return, you know, all we ask for is in compliance and assistance in terms of behaviour and managing their patrons responsibly. And so next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, you know, the challenges and concerns. So some from particularly the police because of a threat of a vehicle attack, and given what happened and a couple of years back, this was Northcote Road was one of the roads that was identified as being vulnerable to attacks. So there was the safety and security of all road users that we had to think about. You know, are the water barriers substantial and robust enough to deter vehicle impact? And mean, I guess, most of you will be aware that they aren't, but it is a very good visual aid. And the fact is, we had to implement change on a regular basis and on a shoestring project, and this effectively was the best option that we can put forward in terms of temporary weekends and provide a good deterrent. And you can see from the photographs that the pedestrians are taking full advantage, use the seating areas, and you've got some cyclists on the right and strolling through, and then you've got some signs at the bottom. These are quite critical signs. So the first week we didn't have any stop, look both way signs, but a lot of feedback were some parents were concerned that because it's still a free route across Northcote Road, that pedestrians were sometimes forgetful, which is helpful that when these signs went up, that stopped all the chatter. And then the middle sign, talks about social distancing, and when cases were going up, again, it was helpful just to have some reminders and to encourage people just to respect the 2 meters requirement. And the sign on the right, and I like this the most, this is a bit of tongue in cheek, really. And so we actually don't have a community space protection order to enforce this. But having a sign and for the stewards to point to it and to advise people, no vertical drinking, and there's a risk of a fine, albeit there wouldn't be, just a warning, a ticking off. And we also got the pubs and to really take ownership and only sell to people and who actually sat at the table, which really helped control the vertical drinkers. Some business facts, and so as you can see, 66 businesses were in favour of the closure and extension when we consulted in August. So this was after our initial, this is what we're doing, and now we've gone back a step just to get some feedback in terms of, do they like it, how their experience have been, would they like to see it extended into September and possibly October. 15 businesses on furlough, a total of 48 members of staff. 17 businesses took on 42 new members of staff. And trade year on year, it's 30% up for July and August. This was a huge contrast to the fortune of other businesses who are not within the closure. But it's been a real success in terms of saving jobs, saving businesses, and giving local community a chance to really gather, meet their friends, and in an open and safe manner. And next slide, please. Public feedback. So we've had a lot of unsolicited responses on site, a lot via social media and more councillors. We also did some polls on visitors, and many turned out that they visited this specifically because it's been reported in local news, and which has been really helped, and businesses spending their money in our ward in the council. I mean, in terms of written responses, 64% were supportive, 13 were against, 23 were undecided. With some of the ones that were against the scheme, they liked the alfresco dining, they liked the experience during the day, but they had concerns about the drinking at night. And but to be honest, I think the public house did a really good job in managing and containing the patrons, and I think that's helped a lot. And we've dealt with a lot of the antisocial behaviour that were historic and have been addressed. And next slide, please. So in terms of summary and next steps, this is Abyssinia Close. There's a coffee shop on the left-hand side from the photograph, and Northcote Records is one of the larger public house on the street. So this is an area where we implemented 7-day closure and throughout the summer months, and it's a real success. It very feel continental, and really enjoyed by locals in the area visiting, and give them a chance and to enjoy outdoor dining. And at the present time, we've continued it with disclosure because it addresses an antisocial behaviour, an issue that you can see at the back of the flats, and where people potentially urinating against the walls. All that's been completely removed as a result of the pub taking responsibility in terms of managing their patrons. And now, during the day, there's lots of mums and young family meeting and gathering in the area. And it's become a real public space and a focal point of the street. In terms of next steps, we've had 16 very successful weekends on Northcote Road, and it's been a real team effort into getting all this up and running. required lots of efforts from various teams across the council to pull together. And there's also a lot of goodwill from officers, because lots of officers worked extra hours and overtime, just making sure that the site is well attended and well manned, and to give them people a good experience of the area. And at the present time, the council is considering they're rolling this out in the next summer, subject to funding, and if there are more permanent ways of managing the closure, because it was a tall ask, having to set up every weekend with 200 barriers. That comes with noise and concerns by residents in terms of disturbance while setup and removal, etc. But all in all, it's been a real good experience for the council, and I think it's been admired by many other councils that have taken a real keen interest and visit the site. Thank you.
Wow, Heanry, thank you. That's really amazing. I can see clapping going on from the audience there. Thank you, and we'll have a chance to ask Heanry lots of questions, but I thought we could move on to Matteo's presentation next. So over to Matteo.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll share my screen right away. So yeah, thanks a lot for the invitation, first of all, and thanks a lot also for the interesting example of the Northcote Street before. The story I would like to tell is basically a familiar story. It's a story of a cycling project in your neighborhood. And of course, the city council or whomever is proposing it asks before or after, usually before, are you happy about the idea of a cycling project? And you usually normally have two sides. And then I would like also to go back to the Northcote example, because I also have some curiosity about it. The shopkeepers, the shop owners usually go, my customers do come by car, 100% of them. My business will die if you take away space. And then you have the other side of it, which is usually someone who has just come back from Amsterdam and says, come on, cycle paths are always better for business. Have you ever been to Amsterdam? We should bring cycle lanes everywhere and businesses will flourish. And this is the topic of my talk today. I will try to be very short. Who of these two hissing cats is right? And the question then is, of course, a very general one, is cycling good for local businesses? I've been already introduced. I just want to complete by saying that I work for a Dutch company. We are based in Amsterdam, but we also, and I think you can tell by my accent, I'm not Dutch, and we work a lot in Italy, which is just to say that we are not used to being, in the Netherlands paradise of cycling. We work a lot in Italy. I work a lot in Italy, which is the country in Europe, I think, with the highest number of cars per person. So we work in difficult contexts too. Back to our hissing cats. Who's right? And the answer, of course, is quite straightforward. The answer is that it depends. Mostly the bike cat is right, and we will see that through the presentation, but it really depends. And it depends on many important things. And the real take of my presentation is that if we look at when cycling might not work, we actually learn a lot about the possibilities and what to look for and which mistakes not to do when we try to bring cycling to the high street. First of all, it depends on the type of neighborhood. Here you have a comparison between two Dutch cities, one with a very high level of cycling, Amsterdam, and one with a relatively, of course, low level of cycling for Dutch standards, which is Rotterdam. The difference between the two cities is not in the quality of cycling infrastructure. The difference is mainly in the type of land use that you find in the cities. It has to do with the history. Rotterdam was bombed in Second World War, and it was rebuilt according to 1960s standards of very little mixed land use. Whereas in Amsterdam, you basically can see here the supermarkets density is much higher, whereas in Rotterdam it is much sparser. And this is thought to be one of the reasons why people in Rotterdam, despite world-class level cycling infrastructure, cycle very much less, And the reason is that it really depends the level of cycling and how much cycling is successful. If you have a vibrant mixed type of street and type of center, very much like the Northcote one that we have seen, or if we are talking about not mixed, quite boring type city. The second thing it depends on, of course, is the type of store that you find within the street or the neighborhood that you're talking about. And not even just the store, but the type of experience that people are going to look for. The presenter, Heanry, before me just used the word experience when he said that people were enjoying the street. And this is very important because people now go outside and outdoor whenever they can. in these times, not just to buy a fridge, not just to buy a laundry machine, but very much to have an experience. And when people look for a wonderful experience, for an enjoyable experience, they look for more cycling, they look for more walking, because cycling and walking, of course, and I'm going to use of course in a very ironic way, but of course provide for a more enjoyable experience, less noise, less pollution, and so on. At the same time, when you go and buy a fridge or a mattress, like the guy on the right, very few people can do it with a bike. And you have to be careful about the fact that specialized stores might suffer if you take away parking spaces. An example that I would like to bring very quickly is the example of the plan that was implemented in Ghent to keep through traffic out of the city center. It very much succeeded, but it had a negative effect for specialized stores. Most of the stores actually, like in the Northcote example that we've seen, saw their sales rise. They had fewer bankruptcies. That's a very difficult word. But specialized stores actually did suffer, and that was measured. It also depends whether cycling is successful or not on who do you want to attract. Again, of course, local residents will much likely love more cycling and will much likely be able to spend more time in your high street. Whereas if you're trying to attract people from outside, especially in contexts unlike the Netherlands, where people do not cycle 10 or 15 kilometers, cycling is not going to be enough. An example again is your typical small and rural city in the Netherlands, in this case MIDDELHARNIS, in which you do not only have that city center and that place to do your groceries. If you come from outside, you have a lot of competitors, and it is very much car-based. Even in the Netherlands, it is. And so again, in this type of context, you risk of having a drop in sales if you take away too many parking spaces without intervening on how people move in the broader sense. Finally, and this is a very economist thing to say, but it's very much important, it really depends how you measure success and what it is that you're saying when, for example, you say cycling people spend more. It is unlikely that people spend more just based on the fact that they use a bike or a car. And spending is not going to change at the macro level, at the national level, or even probably at the London level, just because of more cycling. People will buy whatever they need to buy, however they can. What will happen, and what is important for local politicians to point out, is that spending is going to be reallocated. It's not going to happen here, it's going to happen there. The overall effect, again, at national or even probably at city level is a zero sum. You don't have more or less spending in purely financial terms. Of course, then there are many other factors like pollution, health, congestion. We do a lot of social cost benefit analysis about the great benefits of cycling in terms of these factors, but that's a different story. What is important to say is that probably people are not going to spend more or less, but definitely people are going to spend differently. If people do not spend on purchasing a car, maintaining a car, buying gasoline, which is money that gets spent in London, but then basically flows somewhere else, in Saudi Arabia, if you talk about fuel, and probably in the Netherlands, if you talk about buying a car, because that's where car companies pay their taxes. But if they don't do that, people are going to spend more locally. And that's, of course, an important message. Now, I know this is not what you were expecting, and I know that Clare is probably a bit afraid, like, wow, we invited a Dutch guy to tell us that cycling is bad for business. What a mistake. That's definitely not my point. And my point is cycling is absolutely good. And in most cases, it is good because of all the reasons that we know. I mean, I don't think that the point here is to repeat the obvious, because for us, it is obvious. It increases accessibility. It contributes to the enjoyable experience, which was very much pointed at for the Northcote example. Most people will shop locally if they have the opportunity. So that's, again, very important, especially in times of pandemic. And finally, when you talk to shop owners, you have to explain that they're not closing down because of more cycling or less parking, but especially if they sell fridges or washing machines or bulky objects. I don't know if bulk shopping is actually an English expression, but I made it up. Amazon is their competitor. It's not the local shop. It's not the more cycling. Finally, and this is my last slide, we can look at when and where cycling is not working or not working completely to learn how to make it better. And so what shall we pay attention to? First of all, there is not one size fits all policy. And it is very important that you as city councillors or campaigners, you can measure, experiment with innovative solutions and adapt what is not working with a diverse set of policies. There's not going to be one thing that you do in your high street and it always works. Context matters. And I want to say this again, probably the most important thing here is the most boring one, which is to measure. And I want to repeat it loud and clear, because this is what cities really do not do enough. When they have an example like the Northcote example, for example, that is a treasure. When you are able to do that, when you're able to collect data and you're able to measure the before and the after, then you can use that as an example. Otherwise, you have to start from scratch all of the times. You did Northcote in 2020, you will do the next high street in 2021, and if you didn't measure what happened and the benefits, you will have to start from scratch. Angry shop owners and so on. Finally, cycling alone is not going to solve the problem of traffic congestion, bad quality of public spaces, because it is not cycling, but it is urban fabric that determines attractiveness. Even if you cycle along a highway, no one is going to go and shop there because it is just an ugly place. Again, an ugly experience. What you have to do as a planner, so if you want at a higher level and also in a longer term, but it's fundamental, and this is probably the most important difference between the Netherlands and the rest of the world, I would say, you have to plan for short distances and mixed use of land. And if you can, you have to promote local shops and maybe even ban big supermarkets, big shops to come in too close to the city center. What you have to do actually is not just find a way to bring the people to the high street, but in a way, you cannot only have one high street for 1 million people. That's exaggerated, of course, but you have to have a diffusion of high quality public space. And you have to bring the high street to the people and not just the other way around. Finally, and this is very important, you have to keep in mind that it's about which type of shops are there. In the Northcote example, we've seen a lot of coffee drinking, which is perfect and always works, and a lot of eating and a lot of drinking, although not alcohol. But specialized stores, which sell things that you do not easily find, like a cup of coffee, they might struggle if you don't think the logistics through. And that's the last piece of advice from me today. Thank you very much.
Matteo, thank you. Sorry about the delay there. I was frantically scribbling notes because that is all so incredibly useful. So I've got some questions to fire at you. I'm going to end the poll because I think everyone's responded that wants to on Zoom, and we'll look at the results. In fact, why don't I just share those results now? So we had some questions. I don't know if people watching the webinar were able to see these, or if it was just the Zoom participants. But we asked everyone on Zoom, your opinion, what's the most effective way to convince shopkeepers to support walking and cycling on their high streets? And there were two joint least popular choices, were put them in touch with other shopkeepers from high streets that have had improvements, and offer incentives such as installing bike parking for free outside their shops. So those were the two people least convinced by that. Then the next two more popular were carry out short-term experiments or tactical urbanism, and I guess that's what we're seeing across the nation right now. And jointly with that, research into real customers' mobility habits, how many actually come by car. So again, that's quite a popular one, seen as effective. But the most, and this backs up what Matteo was just telling us, the most popular choice was to convince shopkeepers was provide more research and evidence of successful examples elsewhere. So I guess that's exactly what Matteo was saying, measure, collect the data. And then the next time you're rolling out a scheme, you can say, look how it worked just last year on the streets.
Yeah, if I can just comment on that, and I'm sorry because Catherine wrote that she gave up taking notes there. I'm Italian and I speak very quickly, so I'm really sorry about that. But of course, we will share the presentation, not a problem, and you have my email, and you can email me at any time.
So Catherine is actually not Catherine, judging by the video.
Oh, that's right. Sorry.
It doesn't
sorry.
look like Catherine.
That's right. I'm sorry. I was reading the chat
and
the screen. Sorry. My apologies. The point about measuring is fundamental, and I'm happy that the poll gave this answer. But really, this is something that cities or districts or whoever is responsible do not do enough, because they think that the job is done once the project is successful, and this is the risk is of losing a huge opportunity, because there has been millions probably of projects of pedestrianization. All of them have been painful in most countries. We still struggle to find. You still struggle to find, for example, scientific papers that study that on a regular basis and with a sound and homogeneous methodology. And you can just say, it has been studied in 1,000 cases. This was the result. Of course, it is complicated because results are complicated. Research is complicated. But it is also complicated because cities don't want to spend those little extra money, extra effort, extra whatever to do the research, because they think the project is done, it's closed, and they don't think that they will need those results in, come 3 months, come 3 years, whatever. So whenever I can give my consultancy to cities, this is one of the things I try the most to convince them about. I don't always succeed.
If I may add something to that, I think another issue that is often forgotten is that not all shopkeepers think alike. I'm curious about Heanry's example, but I think when the Netherlands, often a lot of the silent shopkeepers are not so reluctant of thinking about less parking and more space for biking and walking, and I think that's also very useful to use that. And if I may add, at the same time, we are asked at the moment for a small town in the Netherlands to do a study on behalf of the shopkeepers about parking and cycling, and the reason for that is that part of them want a car-free zone, and a part want to stick to the current situation. And what we just simply do there is ask customers first where do you come from and where are you going, and the second question, of course, is what would you do should there not be space for to park your car right in front of the store. And probably the outcome will be that there will be, I think there are 2 shops there who are really car dependent, and I think we can think of a way to have a specific car to load to have their customers load stuff from the store into their cars and make the rest of the street car free, and then with a maximum of half an hour parking or something. And so there are ways, I think, to customize the situation so that more shopkeepers are happy at the end.
Thanks, that's really useful. I'm going to, just looking at the chat again, I think this is for during Heanry's presentation. It looks like this closure is effective all of the time. My understanding was it was just weekends, Heanry.
It was just Saturdays and Sundays.
And then did the businesses get these chairs, or did the council support the businesses or buy the chairs for the businesses? And secondly, what analysis did you do around displacement of traffic or changes in traffic volume?
So in terms of the tables and chairs, and it was down to the businesses, and a lot of them hired it in. Some purchased it. Some actually repurposed the ones from indoors because fortunately the summer weather this year was very good, and they were able to reuse a lot of the furniture as well. But I know the public house that they took on a lot and make some purchases. They even bought olive trees and in tubs, and just to smarten up the area and create that continental feel. In terms of traffic modelling, we didn't do any of that, unfortunately. TfL has taken up the baton for that on our behalf, because they manage all the traffic signals equipment in London. One of the things we were required to do is submit an application on T-Man, to get their approval. So we had 2 lots of approval to get from TfL. One was to close the road, and the other was to secure an agreement with London Buses that they will divert the buses and to adjacent roads, and so that all went through smoothly. I mean, the council had aspirations to close it 7 days, and but with the time that we had, it was really only possible to secure an agreement for Saturday and Sunday. And I think, as it turned out, that having weekends alone would have been more effective in our view, and in terms of not causing too much disruption on the road network during the week, and really giving people a chance then to enjoy the weekends. It just really focused on the benefits of the closure during the weekends, and also businesses, the non-hospitality businesses, and they weren't overly impacted because weekdays there's still vehicular access, everything else can still be all done and maintained.
Sorry, quick question for me just on the back of that, because I'm interested to know if that's going to carry on. Do you think if this scheme becomes permanent, would you want to see it become 7 days a week, or would you support it being weekends only?
I think what the councils have set its heart on is to go back out and to get a bit more feedback, because obviously it took the bold step to make the change, to introduce temporary measures. We got a lot of good feedback, which enabled the extension in September, October. But in terms of next steps, we know the businesses are keen. They don't want to see the red and white barriers. And as officers, we're keen to have some more permanent features in terms of perhaps changing the road layouts, using gates and barriers, and to enable more swift action. And so it really comes down to what the engagement and feedback we're going to get in the coming months to see what would be possible next summer. I mean, it's probably worth highlighting, had it not been for COVID, we wouldn't have had the London Street Space Fund, we wouldn't have the DFT Active Fund, we wouldn't have the Reopening High Streets Fund. And I mean, the cost of 16 weeks, it's probably close to 180, 200,000 pounds, and just to support the businesses and the local community. So had it not been for these grants, I don't think it would have been possible and to do what we did.
I'm just having a look at the other chat questions.
Yeah, Bob asked for. He remarked that mostly it's the shopkeepers who take the first parking place, and I think it's true if the city doesn't take any action, which of course they should. And I wonder, do you ever check how long cars are being parked in the shopping areas? Because this is of course a very easy thing to check. If they stand there for longer than a couple of hours, then of course there's easy ways to regulate that, just by making it more expensive or prohibit standing there for longer than 2 hours, for example.
If you're asking me, in the particular area where I was referring to, there is a relatively short stay there, but there is parking on side streets, very close, and that parking is often taken by the shop or the shop workers. And so it isn't quite as easy as you think to actually change habits and to change attitudes. And quite often shop workers or shop owners are coming from some distance. They don't actually live, they don't no longer live above the shop. They maybe live somewhere away and just find it easier to commute because then they can bring the goods. So I've talked to lots of shop owners and their managers. If you talk to the guy who's managing or the woman who's managing the shop, they often just don't have a view. They say, well, you'll have to talk to the owner. So there is a big education job that's needed, but I know it's been successful elsewhere.
But of course, it's in the interest of all shopkeepers to use the available parking space as efficient as possible by the customers. So if they have to walk for 15 minutes and park the cars a little bit further every day, that should be a little effort for big gain, I would say.
Sure.
And if I can just complete on what Bob was saying, the fact that the shop owner does not live nearby is actually one of the reasons why they think everyone else does not live nearby and actually comes from far away. which is a dynamic when you just think about it for 5 seconds, make no sense, actually. I mean, people do buy locally. This is like, of course, if we're talking about the local shop, like a small shop, if you're talking about the super huge supermarket, that's a different story. But and of course, if you're talking about the US, it's a different story. But in Europe, people do buy locally for 80% of the time, I would say. But the view is distorted if the shop owner lives 10 kilometers from the shop and comes by car. So some of the most interesting research I've seen, and I was talking about it with Clare before, is the huge difference there is when you ask a shop owner, how do your customers come here and how far do they live? Everyone comes by car and everyone lives 10 kilometers. But then you ask the customers when they come out of the shop, and everyone lives in a radius of 1 or 2 kilometers, and not a lot of them come by car, actually. And this striking difference is actually, I would say, one of the things that should be researched the most. It's easy research to do, actually. It's straightforward. And I would say it can be quite convenient and quite efficient in convincing shop owners that their view is distorted.
Well, we're very fortunate with Northcote Road, because it's in a residential area, it's within a controlled parking zone, there are pay and display bays. So we were actually able to pull off data in terms of parking losses. And when the road was completely pedestrianised, what the impact of income was. Effectively, that helps determines the number of cars typically parked in terms of hours, etc. There's a lot of data around that, and that we were able to pull together and review for future.
Tim has asked in the chat, and I don't know if you feel this has already been answered, Tim. I think for Heanry, did you get much resistance from businesses on Northcote roads? And if so, how did you overcome it?
It was the first bit of closure, because we had agreement and from the bid itself and from the leading group of Northcote businesses. We didn't consult each individual businesses. And I know some businesses weren't happy about it because effectively, if they were selling furniture or if they were selling pet foods, etc., a vehicle was important. But by and large, I think each of the businesses looked out for each other as well. And to give you an example, where a lot of the restaurants they have very small and internal dining space, and other businesses were quite happy to share their forecourts, if you like, and just to enable them to have extra dining spaces and during the week and on weekends as well. So there is very much a community, and I think overall the businesses did enjoy having the weekend closures. And I do think that it is probably most likely to be weekends going forward, because having a 7-day closure, does have a lot of impact as well, on the road network in terms of how the businesses and get the deliveries, get their waste collected. But that's something that's still out for the jury when we do go and consult and get a bit more data back.
So Heanry, just to clarify something, you talked about a poll feedback that was 60-something% in favour.
Yeah.
That was the general public. I'm assuming would businesses have had a different result, maybe higher?
The businesses, it's on the slide.
Obviously, there are some great statistics about people taking out furlough and new staff.
Yeah, so the 60. Yeah, I don't have how many businesses there were, but I would envisage there would have been no more than 80, 85. So there was a much higher percentage from the businesses. And Northcote Road, it's very much a hospitality businesses being the main focus as well. And so that would have helped with the numbers in that regard.
But did you have non-food and beverage businesses who were not happy with what was happening?
So there were some hair salons and nail parlors and the beauty salons. They were very happy in a sense because they were in so high demand. They had a complete order book going forward, so they weren't impacted by free traffic, if you like, people parking up and trying to secure appointments. They already had a good log. But I know there are some businesses who weren't so happy, and I think that the pet shop being one of those, and because typically their clients do drive and buy their stuff, put it in the car and move on, and they felt they were impacted upon as a result of that.
So Bob's made a very good point. Potentially there's a new business opportunity for a cycle business, cargo bike business to work with businesses in a pedestrianised area, both bringing goods in and delivering customer purchases. Does anyone want to comment on that?
I think it's not just an opportunity, it's a reality in many contexts. So yes, there is an opportunity in the sense that people have already taken it up. And I don't remember, Kees, if you remember the name of that company. We interviewed a specific company that's actually working on quite the same type of business model. And again, as I was also pointing out, like quickly, but I think it's an important point, e-commerce is there to stay, and a lot of the things that we buy, we don't go there to buy, they come to us. So that's also something that's going to reshape the way our streets look like and function in the next decade or so. So of course, yes, I do agree with Bob that there is a high potential for that.
I think actually, Claire, so just quickly, that's one Heanry might be aware of, but in Richmond, certainly there's a local kind of environmental group who are trying to promote and support businesses by offering delivery by e-cargo bike, and the council's kind of the council's helping to publicise it, but it's one of those things where I must admit, when I first looked at it, I thought actually, it feels like it's that funny combination of we need to actively promote it and push it as a thing that businesses, should ideally do, as well as have someone who's got kind of the entrepreneurial interest to set it up, if that makes sense. So, having the kind of the local government backing to help push businesses to use this, as well as having someone who's actually setting the service up. And I'm wondering whether that's whether that combination is always needed, or whether we think that for example, the better provision of cycling infrastructure and stuff is one of the key things that we need to just make that happen.
I think a lot goes back to the councillors in terms of how they view and the road space to be used. If you pedestrianise the area, effectively the only effective means of transport would be use of cargo bikes, etc. And I know, for example, Putney High Street, the bid, and there's £10,000 allocated to support a cargo bike initiative. And so these are just some examples that the council can help to intervene and make a case. And but ultimately, it does need businesses to buy in. If there's a local bid in the area which is keen to drive change, then I think that's likely to happen in the very near future.
Go for it, Tim. Oh, we can't hear you, or I can't hear you.
Sorry, I had a second mute button on this thing, which was still on for some reason. Can everybody hear me now? Is that okay?
Yes.
Just to say, Catherine, although I don't know your real name, that we ran a similar scheme in Greenwich with the butchers on one of our local high streets. And yeah, I think a lot of the evidence that we gathered from them was that they actually spent a little bit more time with their customers, as well as it being quicker, as well as it being cheaper, and obviously as well as it being greener. And we offered some incentives for them to buy an e-cargo bike at a later date. But definitely the feedback that we got that we weren't expecting was actually just how much more face-to-face time you could spend with customers. So that's another thing to bear in mind, I think, when it comes to promoting e-cargo bikes for small businesses, that kind of the face-to-face contact you can have and the kind of relationship building with your customer base.
Has anyone? Catherine has revealed himself to be Tim, so that's good. Hello, Tim. Has anyone got any thoughts about logistics? Matteo, you kind of touched on logistics, and I'm just thinking about things like not just cargo bikes, but consolidation hubs and consolidating deliveries generally.
Yeah, I think logistics is really fundamental because it's just going to increase. There is no question there, I think, and I don't think anyone can stop Amazon. We're talking about that case once, and it's not going to happen in the next 10 years. I don't know if it should happen, but it's not going to happen. And so logistics is fundamental, and you have to think it through, especially for the Also, it has a very peculiar dynamic of type of traffic. For example, like in some of the examples I've seen in Italy, even when parking were dedicated to logistics, they were not used. And the reason is that logistics, the driver sees that as a waste of time, even just parking properly. Maybe that's an Italian thing, but I don't think so actually. Even just parking properly, it's a waste of time because they go for the seconds really, not just for the minutes. And probably there's regulation there to be put in place and give them a better quality of job, because that's a fundamental thing. The thing that they rush so much really prevents any type of policy to be effective. That is also the case for cycle logistic. It's not immune to that actually. And then of course, once you solve that and you give them a little bit more time just even to park their van properly, then you have to of course organize it around the city. And as Kees was mentioning, it really comes to the fact that you have to go for inner circles and you have to work for, you have to keep everything huge at the boundaries, and then you have to go smaller and smaller as you go closer to the city center. Not just the city center, actually the residential areas. Because I don't really like the fact that people talk about the city center as where is, the city center is where people live and everything else happens outside. That's not the case. You really have to protect the residential areas in the outskirts of the cities even more. And so, for example, I think that filtered permeability, like the one that was shown in Northcote Street, that's also fundamental, because then you have to create, of course, a big hub outside and then smaller and smaller hubs as you go inside, or as you go closer to residential.
Thank you. That is really helpful, and it touches on if anyone's managed to see London Cycling Campaign's Climate Safe Streets report. It talks about the necessity of these consolidational mobility hubs in making our roads carbon zero. So I definitely recommend reading that. And so there is a comment from Kees about size of vehicles and weight. Do you want to just touch on that a bit more, Kees? Or
well, I could, but I think what your question about, and of course it's a right question. Is are all shopkeepers happy in Heanry's experiment? But another question could also be: should all shopkeepers be happy all the time? I think as a politician, you're voted, you're elected to take decisions on behalf of all voters, all population. And I think what's happening in the main street is that some shops are losing, as Matteo touched on, because of e-commerce, for example. The winning shops are the shops who are more into leisure, into experience, into fun shopping. It's a development which is going on no matter what happens with parking or cycling. What I'm afraid of is that politicians are feeling pity for those shopkeepers and try to keep them alive no matter what, which will be impossible at the end. And I think a good politician is also there to take decisions, and perhaps you could help a shopkeeper change his shop or something to make an alternative, or as they did in Delft, in a city in Amsterdam, where the city decided to heavy decrease parking capacity. They opened a guarantee fund for shopkeepers who would be damaged. So I think in a 5-year period, shopkeepers after the change could come to the council and ask for a subsidy if they could prove that their revenues had decreased. And at the end, nobody showed up. So it's, of course, change is scary and nobody likes change, but I think politicians are there to make change for the better.
that was a very brave gamble by Delft, or else they just knew, they're very confident that taking away parking wouldn't affect businesses.
It is brave, yeah.
But that's a great example. Thank you. And Kees, you've also commented in the chat, in Amsterdam, limitations on delivery vehicles get stricter every year, which sounds very necessary. And then Tim has asked earlier, I think this is for Heanry and Matteo, slightly random question. He says, do you think there's a difference in business response from smaller and independent businesses compared to larger chains? And I think this might be the last. We might have to wrap up with this one.
Well, my experience, yes, there is. If private shop owners are much more aware of this situation, the local situation, are much more ready to move, whereas big companies only think big in numbers and think in general terms, and are opposed to, are very much in favor of cycling of parking. I mean, in general. Although in the Netherlands it has changed a bit, but I think in London it's still the case.
I think you also make the case a little bit for the opposite case, maybe, because there could be also, I mean, I think in some cases you could also have some big companies that have their corporate social responsibility, whatever, some piece of paper that says that they have to do something with the environment, and that might, it doesn't have to be, but it might be a leverage to make them do something about it. And at the same time, as I was saying before, sometimes, I mean, the local shop owner has his own personal view, which can be, very much related to his personal characteristics. So I think you're probably right. I think you're probably right. But I also think that you could argue that in some specific companies, it could also be the opposite.
I think, on the big businesses, they've got obviously the buying power. They can dictate, when things are delivered and when in terms of loading and unloading, in terms of price as well. So for the small businesses, they do need to find a niche to attract their customers. So ultimately, it comes down to the customer support in the local business. So some butchers, some organic food stores, some local bookshops, they've done very well because they have that customer engagement and they understand the local community needs, which is why they're so successful in the local area. And,
just to jump in with the experience from Soho that I was aware of, with this kind of experimental alfresco dining with the time closures on streets, it was the small independent businesses that benefited the most because they were able to react quickly and be nimble and just put in the measures that they needed to put in, whereas the chain restaurants weren't able to react as fast and change all its policies from the top. And so some of them simply didn't reopen. So it was just interesting to see how it benefited small businesses over larger ones. So we're officially out of time. We can carry on chatting until we're kicked out. But just to let you know, if you're on Zoom, to get back into the main session, it's the same link that you joined with in the first place. And while we're waiting to be kicked out, has anyone got any more questions or comments?
Just have one comment. I will not be joining the joint session because I have a kindergarten pickup to make with an electric bike and trailer. But Kees will be there. So for any further curiosity, inquiry, whatever, you will have my email. I will actually write it down here. And thanks a lot for the invitation and for being here.
Thank you. Thanks, Matteo. It was really great to hear from you. And I noticed in the chat, Kees has offered to say more about or send some information about the Delft parking revenue guarantee scheme. So I don't know how we can make that public for people who aren't on Zoom. So Matteo's emails come up. I think we can contact Kees through the Dutch Cycling Embassy if anyone wants to know more about that. Probably a Google search would bring it up, wouldn't it, Kees? Delft parking revenue guarantee.
Yeah, I wrote down Tim's email address. So if I find something, I will email it to him at least. But I can also copy you, Claire. So perhaps if there's a central place to publish.
Okay. So any queries about that to LCC, yeah. I can deal with.
Yeah, I did try and search it very quickly. All it came up with was how to park in Delft. So I'm sure there's probably some more search engine optimization that could be done in a bit more time. But thanks anyway.
As we still haven't been kicked out, I'll just make the observation I made to Matteo before the session. I live in Enfield and we had a cycle lane put in very controversially about 5 years ago. Their own poll of their customers to find out how they came to the high street, and they got the results that they wanted. Apparently 90% of their customers came by car. This is the shopkeeper leaning over the counter saying, please fill in my clipboard and make sure you say car. when the professionals did it, TfL ran a survey of their own professionally, and they found the figure was actually 22% came as drivers or passengers. So it just, you know, there is that real bias, and I think there's lots of studies that have shown the same kind of thing. So yes, Matteo, your point about making the data clear is a very, very good one.
There is a lot of research, not a lot of research, unfortunately, but some research that points at similar results in Italy and elsewhere. And the point, of course, again, is that every city or even every district thinks that they are completely different from the other one. So whenever you say, have you seen something in London, and you say it in Italy, they will say, yeah, but that's London, it's not the same. And then you point at a city in Italy, Milan, and in Rome, they would say that it's completely different context. So even though you have to do research and you can showcase, use the examples, that changing people's mind is hard, and they normally need an example from exactly their district or which actually is feasible because it's not a complicated research to carry out in that case.
In our experience, my borough, Enfield, is right next door to Waltham Forest, which was doing amazing changes. And I'm afraid even the comparison of the next door borough wasn't enough for these shopkeepers. You know, you had to be, I don't know what it has to be, the same street. So it's frustrating. But I guess the more these studies are published, the more ground it gives you. Any other comments or feedback?
Actually, it's a bit of a cheeky one. It's like, I'm going to ask Heanry if he knows anything about Richmond Town Centre, because we've gathered tons and tons of data on Richmond Town Centre. And I know we have a huge issue with the fact that it's basically, apparently bus-wise, it's as busy as Oxford Street. But we're just desperate to get traffic out there. And I'm wondering if he knows that there's like, how would we take what Boroughs done in Northcote Road and so on, and bring that to other areas in the neighbouring borough?
It's tricky. No, I know Richmond Town Centre. Nick's got a very keen interest and a vision for the town centre itself. But again, it's local politics effectively, and the businesses. You know, there's a Richmond bid in the area. That they have a very strong sense of what it is that they see and they want. And you know, with the election 18 months away, the local elections, and that's just some of the challenges that you know, there's engineers and planners we just need to overcome. It is managing expectations. So to be honest, I don't know much about it. But again, you know, to me, it sounds like there's a lot of politics and businesses is those views that probably carries the most weight, even though they're probably not directly the influencing factor in terms of the elections. It'll be the residents and who nominate the elected members.
So Heanry, are you saying the bids in Richmond are saying we need the cars for our businesses to work, which sounds like the opposite of...
No, I'm not saying that at all. It's been a few years since I've worked in Richmond, and in terms of getting involved, because I knew of the bid when they were first set up, but haven't had any engagement and not really well placed to talk about, you know, the town centre itself. But again, it comes down to the support and the appetite and of councillors and businesses, and which will probably dictate, you know, what's possible and achievable.
You see, I think the bid is actually quite supportive of taking traffic out, because they've seen, again, from Matteo, they've seen the data. So we know that over 60% of traffic driving through Richmond is just driving straight through. So I think the bid's actually quite supportive, but I think, as Heanry says, there's a huge lot of politics around there, because Richmond straddles the river. We have a limited number of river crossings, so everybody's worried about, oh, well, if you close Richmond Town Centre, then you're going to clog up one of the other river crossings. You know, all these kind of worries about where does the traffic go just keep coming out, unfortunately.
For that, actually, you I'm sure you know, but there is also in that case a little bit of research that you can point out about the fact that traffic does go somewhere in some percentage, but also disappears in many cases for many very humane reasons that engineers like myself are not, and modeling even less so. But traffic does disappear whenever you take out one possibility of going through. There will going to be some people that just take another road, but there are also going to be people that do not take the trip at all, or take the trip with a different mode, not by car, but different mode. So that's also, again, examples that you can use, although it is not always easy because people need to see it for that specific road.
I've heard I mean, what you're saying is so well evidenced, but I've heard it dismissed as a fairy tale made up by Transport for London over and over again. But wouldn't that be a prime candidate for some temporary trial measures, and having like weekends, like in Wandsworth, a weekend closure of Richmond town centre? Is that something that would be easier to sell, maybe?
I don't know if you're asking. Yeah, sorry.
I'm asking anyone. Tim's not looking convinced.
I think the issue is actually it's weird. It's like whenever it's been raised. So there's because Richmond Town Centre is quite densely residential as well, but it's actually one of the, Richmond's an intensely rich borough, and you've got some of the most expensive properties actually very close to town centre too. So you have some very entitled people who genuinely think that their kind of wealth importance makes their voice the most important thing. So I think actually our struggle is not really with the businesses at all. It's about it's local people trying to convince them. So maybe actually you're right. Maybe if we can get a kind of a let's close it and see what happens, I think that could be the answer.
Has that been effective, Kees and Matteo? I mean, I'm thinking of places that have had car-free days where they've closed a whole town centre. I think in London our car-free days have been quite timid to date, but maybe not elsewhere.
Oh, I can bring you some bad examples, the Italian ones, and then Kees can probably the good ones, the Dutch ones. The bad examples from Italy is that no, they're not very effective, especially when they are car-free days, like a single day, Saturday or Sunday usually. Again, it's very easy for people to dismiss. It's a Saturday, no one cares. It's a Sunday, no one is working, and so that's I don't think that's very effective. And furthermore, I think the other important thing is that you need a little bit of time for the situation to readjust. It is very likely that if you close down one road, you will have more congestion on the parallel roads for some weeks, months, I don't know. It depends on the context, of course. So for a little bit of time, and you cannot just think that you will close the street, measure the through traffic in the parallel roads, and see that it has disappeared magically. That's not going to happen. What is going to happen is that in time, people will change their mind and people will change their habits. The land use is actually even maybe going to change. You see that happening, for example, in Italy. You pedestrianize a street, and that street changes. It does not remain the same street, so the use of it also changes. But again, you need a little bit of time. The experiments are very good if you can measure the positive impacts on the street, because that's very likely going to happen overnight. Much less likely is that you will measure overnight the change, the more global change, if you want.
I agree, and I think I agree with Matteo that it takes some time to see the long-term effects, of course, of changes. But at the same time, if you present as a city, if you present the measure as a temporarily experiment, that takes away some fear of some groups, perhaps, and at the same time, it helps in mobilizing other groups that benefit from the change. So if often, of course, after you change, for example, you make a cut somewhere in the street, everybody shouts, "This is not what we want." And after the change has happened, then part of the people say, "We don't want it to turn back again." At the same time, some people will want to turn it back, but then you have another discussion because people also see the potential of what you've changed. I think in Copenhagen, also in Amsterdam, they do it like that. It's to present measures like a temporary experiment, And of course, there is a possibility to turn back to before, but the purpose is to keep it as to make it permanent change.
Thank you, and I think that's what we're learning from low traffic neighbourhoods. Exactly that when things go in for 6 months minimum, then you start to see what the transformation is.
And of course, communication, just closing the street, of course there's a lot of communication needed as well, but I don't have to tell you that.
First of all, it's opening a street, as Heanry was pointing out, of course, not closing.
Yes. We're not closing streets, we're opening them.